The Flight Management Computer, or FMC, is a tool that reduces flight crew workload by eliminating the need for many routine tasks and computations. The FMC contains internal files of stored information or databases, a navigation database, a performance database, and an airline policy file. The navigation database contains detailed navigation data from sources such as departures, arrivals, and en route and approach charts. This data is kept current with frequent updates. All necessary airplane performance data is also stored in the FMC. The airline policy file contains data that can be modified to accommodate specific airline operating requirements. The FMC also receives external data from airplane systems and from the flight crew to constantly update its calculations. The FMC uses the internal and external data to calculate the optimum flight profile and sends commands to the autoflight systems. The FMC also sends data to the flight crew. Via the ADI, the HSI, and the Control Display Unit, or CDU. Let's look more closely at the relationship between the FMC CDU and the flight crew. The CDU is an interpreter that allows the crew to communicate with the FMC. There are two CDUs located on the flight deck aisle stand. Let's see how easy it is to operate the CDU. Touch either highlighted area to display the CDU. The CDU has a display screen, alpha and numeric keys to enter data, and function keys to display specific pages of data. Line select keys are used to select, enter, or delete data. If the display seems dim, it's because the last crew set a low brightness level. Increase the brightness with the brightness control. Now, let's see how the function keys can be used to display data. Push the nav radio function key. The nav radio page is now displayed. Navigation radios are tuned and monitored using this page. Notice that the page title corresponds to the function key you pushed. Data lines are on both the left and right side of the display. They contain data that is entered automatically by the FMC or manually by the flight crew. Line titles identify the type of data on the line below. Now let's use another function key. Push the root key to display the root page. The page title confirms you are displaying the route page. Flight plan route data is entered and displayed on this page. Notice that some data lines on the screen display boxes, and others display dashes. Boxes indicate that certain data must be entered for the FMC to properly calculate required data for the crew. Dashes mean that data entry is optional. When available, the data should be entered to improve the accuracy of FMC calculations. Now let's look at how data is entered into the CDU. By entering the ICAO identifier for the origin airfield. First, use the alpha keys to type the letter K. Notice that your entry appeared at the bottom of the display screen. This area of the screen is called the scratch pad. All data entered manually by the crew is displayed here first. Now complete the airfield identifier by typing the letters B, F, and I in that order. Confirm your scratchpad data entry is correct. Scratchpad data is transferred to a data line by pushing the appropriate line select key. Transfer KBFI by pushing the line select key adjacent to the origin line. You have now entered Boeing Field as the origin airport. The FMC also checks your scratchpad entry to see if it is reasonable and in the correct format. For example, instead of typing 13 right, type RWY as the designator for the departure runway. Now transfer RWY to the runway line by pushing the adjacent line select key. Notice that the FMC displays an invalid entry message in the CDU scratchpad. Also, a message annunciator light appears to help call your attention to the message. RWY was not accepted because the FMC expected a number to be entered into the runway line. The FMC message can be cleared from the scratchpad with the clear key. Push it now to remove the message and extinguish the message light. To enter the correct runway designator, you must first clear the incorrect data from the scratchpad. Pushing the clear key once clears the last character of data. Push it once now. A series of single pushes clears data one character at a time. Pushing and holding the clear key clears all data from the scratchpad at the same time. Push and hold the clear key. Practice this now by using the alphanumeric and clear keys to enter and clear data in the scratchpad. Touch the forward arrow when you are ready to continue with the lesson. After clearing the scratchpad, you can now enter the correct runway designator by typing 13 right and transferring it to the runway line. The departure runway is correctly entered. The remaining data entries on this page will be completed for you. You've seen how function keys are used to display CDU pages. However, some pages can also be directly accessed by using prompts on the display screen. Pushing the line select key adjacent to the caret prompt is often the fastest way to display the listed page. To see how this works, display the Performance Initialization page. During pre-flight, performance data is entered on this page to initialize the FMC for performance calculations. Display the index page next. This page provides access to a series of pre-flight initialization pages and various pages of reference data. Now, display the Position Initialization page. Present position is entered on this page to initialize the IRS position. The format of the data you enter on a page is often important. This line requires a latitude and longitude entry. Both coordinates must be entered together and must conform to the format requested by the line, including the decimal points. Correct formats for data entries are covered in more detail in other FMC lessons. Another way to enter data is to copy information from one data line to another. Push the line select key adjacent to the GPS position line. Lines selecting the coordinates from the display copy them into the scratchpad. Now transfer the data from the scratchpad to the Set IRS position line. As you can see, it's not always necessary to use the keypad to enter data. Now let's look at other features of the CDU. Display the legs page. This page lists the waypoints in the route of flight in order. Because one page cannot list all waypoints in a flight profile, the FMC automatically creates additional pages to accommodate the remaining waypoints. This indicates there are 3 pages of waypoints for this flight plan. And you are looking at page 1. The next page key can be used to move forward through the other pages. Push the next page key to display page 2. The page number changed to show that you are looking at the second page of waypoints. To return to page 1, push the previous page key. Now push the previous page key again. This causes the last page in the series of legs pages to display. When there are multiple pages, you can access any page using the next page or previous page keys. We have returned to page 1 to illustrate another data entry feature. The small characters on these lines indicate that data are values automatically computed by the FMC. This data can be changed or overwritten by the crew. ATC has just advised you to cross alder at flight level 190. An altitude can be entered in feet or hundreds of feet. In this example, enter 190 or flight level 190 and line select it to the data line opposite alder. The original data is replaced with the new data. The new data appears in large characters indicating the flight crew entered the data. The mod indicates that you are modifying the profile. In this example, you must push the execute key to make the change permanent. Do this now. Use of this key is discussed in more detail in another lesson. We will continue and look at one way to delete data from the FMC. Data can be deleted using the delete key and the line select keys. ATC has now advised you to cancel the flight level 190 altitude restriction that you just entered for Alder. First, check that the scratch pad is blank. Then push the delete key. Note that Delete appears in the scratch pad. Now, push the line Select key adjacent to the data that you want to delete. The restriction has been deleted and replaced by a predicted altitude computed by the FMC. Push the Execute key to make the change active. Not all data can be deleted. For example, attempting to delete the active waypoint displays a scratchpad message and an annunciator light. Clear the scratchpad to continue. You have been using the CDU to communicate with the FMC, but the CDU can also be used to control some airplane subsystems. To show this, display the menu page. Note that ACT appears beside the FMC line. This indicates the CDU is activated to interface with the FMC. Additional subsystems are controlled from the CDU and are listed on the menu page. The memory prompt is used by maintenance for checking CDU memory. If REQ is displayed, it means that the subsystem is requesting pilot action. To interface with the control functions of a subsystem, push the appropriate line Select key. We will not discuss subsystems any further since they are airline specific. Now, select FMC to return to an FMC page. Correct. There are 5 CDU pages to review during FMC pre-flight. The first 3 pages, the ident page, the position initialization page, and the route page are included in the initial pre-flight. The last 2 pages, the performance initialization page and the takeoff reference page, are reviewed during final pre-flight preparations after load information becomes available. Access to these pages is provided in sequence during pre-flight using the line Select prompts at the bottom right corner of each page, or by selecting the index prompt at the bottom left corner of each page. Use the route key to display the route page to input or change origin, destination, or route data. The initial pre-flight begins with the ident page. The ident page is displayed automatically during normal power-up of the airplane, or can be manually displayed at any time via the Initialization Reference Index page. Display the ident page. With the ident page displayed, you're ready to begin the FMC pre-flight. You can check for correct FMC performance data and correct engines. But the most important thing to check on this page is whether the active navigation database is valid. There are 2 navigation databases stored in the FMC, each valid for 28 days. In this example, the active database is valid from June 2nd to June 30th. and the inactive database is valid from June 30th to July 27th. The FMC uses the active database for all its navigational calculations. If the current date and the active database do not agree, the scratchpad message "Nav data out of date" appears, indicating the active database must be updated. To do this, first clear the message, then select the inactive database into the scratchpad. Next, move the inactive database to the active line. The active navigation database is now valid. The ident page pre-flight is complete. Display the position initialization page. The position initialization page is used to enter the airplane's position so the IRSs can complete their alignment. Inserting the latitude and longitude of any of these positions into the set IRS position line allows the IRSs to complete their alignment. Entering the ICAO identifier of the departure airport into the reference airport line, displays the airport reference point coordinates from the navigation database. After the reference airport is entered, dashes display to allow entry of a reference airport gate number. The last position line displays the last FMC computed position. The keypad can be used to enter coordinates into the scratchpad for a manual position entry. Entry of a reference airport gate number displays the coordinates for that gate position. GPS position displays coordinates derived by signals received from satellites orbiting the Earth. GPS is the most accurate, and reference airport is the least accurate position for alignment. Selecting the desired coordinates into the set IRS position line allows the IRSs to complete the alignment process. Use the most accurate position to update the set IRS position line. GPS sets the Universal Time Coordinate, or UTC. If GPS is not available, the CDU displays the time from the captain's clock. The line title shows manual instead of GPS. The position initialization page is complete. Display the route page to continue the FMC pre-flight. The next step in the FMC pre-flight is to load the flight plan route on the route page. Route page entries are covered in detail in a separate lesson. For this lesson, we will load a company route stored in the FMC for a flight from Boeing Field to Los Angeles. Entry of the company route identifier, BFI LAX, into the company route line, loads the company route into Route 1. Activate the route entry. Now execute the route entry. The company route is now active. The initial FMC pre-flight is complete. After receiving the final loading information from dispatch, pre-flight of the FMC is completed using the performance initialization and takeoff reference pages. The performance initialization page can be displayed by line selecting the performance initialization prompt on the active route page, or by pressing the initialization reference key. Pushing the init ref key on the ground displays either the pause init page or the perf init page. The pause init page is displayed if the aircraft initial position has not yet been entered on the pause init page. The perf init page is displayed if the initial position has been entered. Display the performance initialization page. The performance initialization page is used to enter airplane and route data for performance calculations. Total fuel on board is automatically displayed during pre-flight if valid totalizer signals are available. Entry of either the gross weight or the zero fuel weight is required, but use zero fuel weight for more accurate FMC performance calculations. The load manifest is now available. Enter the zero fuel weight. The gross weight is automatically calculated and displayed after entry of the zero fuel weight. Reserve fuel and cruise altitude are required for FMC calculations. Enter them now. The cost index is used to calculate economy climb and cruise speeds. It is a number provided by dispatch that adjusts the relationship of the cost of operating the airplane and the cost of fuel. In general, the higher the cost index, the higher the economy climb and cruise speeds. Enter the cost index value from the load manifest. The cruise CG is used by the FMC to calculate maximum altitude and maneuver margins during cruise. A default value is used if no entry is made by the flight crew. The FMC uses the ICAO standard step size of 4,000 feet to plan the optimum step climb en route. Crew entries are allowed in 1,000-foot increments. The performance initialization page entries are complete. Display the takeoff reference page to continue the pre-flight. Takeoff data is entered on the takeoff reference page. Start by entering the takeoff flap setting. Entry of the takeoff CG allows the FMC to calculate a takeoff trim setting. Enter the CG. After entry of the takeoff CG, the stabilizer trim setting is calculated and displayed. The thrust line displays the assumed temperature and reference thrust mode. Initially, dashes are displayed to allow entry of an assumed temperature and full rated takeoff thrust is indicated. Assumed temperature is entered on the thrust line using the CDU keypad. Enter the assumed temperature. The takeoff thrust mode changes to indicate assumed temperature takeoff thrust. The selected takeoff thrust is also displayed on ICAS. The runway position shift line displays the active runway and takeoff distance from the threshold. The FMC always assumes you will take off from the threshold. Valid position shift entries are 1 or 2-digit integers between 0 and 30. Entries can be optionally preceded by a negative sign. If GPS is not available, the FMC position is updated to the position shift value when the auto throttle is engaged. If GPS is operating, the FMC position updating to the position shift value is inhibited. After obtaining the takeoff V-speeds, they can be entered on the takeoff reference page. Enter V1. After entry of V1, V1 appears in the parked position on the speed tape. Enter the remaining V-speeds. If required entries have not yet been completed on the POSINIT, route, or PERFINIT pages, a prompt for the first incomplete page appears. Once all required entries have been made, the pre-flight complete status message is displayed. FMC pre-flight requires review of these 5 CDU pages. Route page entries are normally made after completing the position initialization page. Display the route page. Page 1 of Route 1 is displayed. The page title indicates there is not an active flight plan in Route 1. The FMC can store 2 flight plan routes. Line selecting the Route 2 prompt would display page 1 of Route 2. Prior to beginning your route entry, the route page may be blank, or may contain a route or route segment from a previous flight. In either case, manual route entry begins by entering the origin airport. Entry of an origin airport will delete any previously entered route. Let's manually enter this route from Boeing Field to Los Angeles. Begin by entering the ICAO identifier of the departure airport KBFI into the origin line. Next, enter the runway. Enter the ICAO identifier for Los Angeles, KLAX, as the destination. Enter the flight number. Enter this data into the correct line. Page 1 is complete. Route entry will continue on page 2. Display page 2 of Route 1. Route segments can be entered starting on Route page 2. Each route segment is entered in ATC format, similar to filing a flight plan. The route segment or airway information is entered on the left, and the end point of the route segment is entered on the right. Enter SEA as the first endpoint under the To column. The Select Desired Waypoint page is displayed. Because SEA identifies more than one point in the database, details about each point are displayed. The frequency, the type of waypoint, and the latitude and longitude are displayed. The desired waypoint can be selected with either the right or left line select key. Select Seattle Vortec. The CDU returns to the route page and inserts the selected waypoint. Direct is entered automatically into the via column if a route segment is not entered. Now enter the high altitude airway J1 into the next via line. There may be many waypoints along your route. However, you only need to enter the endpoint that defines your route segment. Complete the segment by entering the endpoint AVE into the boxes in the To column. Continue entering the route in the order shown. Direct to SMO is the next route segment. Before entering the next segment, however, let's erase the last two route segments and look at an easier way of entering those segments. You have just entered J1 in the via line. You are cleared via J1 to Avenal and then Victor 107 to Fillmore. Since J1 and Victor 107 intersect at Avenal, you can skip the Avenal entry and simply enter Victor 107 under J1. Enter Victor 107 into the next via line. Avenal is automatically entered into the To line after J1. If the database does not contain a named intersection where the two airways cross, the airway-to-airway intersection entry method can still be used, and the FMC will create and name a waypoint for you at the intersection of the two airways. Continue entering the route in the order shown. Before the autoflight system can fly the route, it must be made active. Activating a route is a two-step process. First, push the Activate key. Notice the Execute light illuminates. Now, make the route active by pushing the Execute key. The page title has changed to Active Route 1, indicating the route is now active. The manual route entry is now complete. Next, let's look at an easier way of entering a route by using the Company Route feature. A company route is a predefined route that your company has loaded into the navigation database. Let's enter the route from Boeing Field to Los Angeles using the Company Route entry method. The entire route from KBFI to KLAX is entered by simply using the company route name. Enter the company route name. The entire route has been entered. Company routes can include the runway and the departure information. However, due to runway and departure changes, the runway and departure are usually entered separately. Now check the route segments on page 2. Activate and execute the route. The company route is now active. Next, let's look at how to add a standard instrument departure to the route. Your flight plan includes a standard instrument departure and a transition onto the route. Display the departures page by pushing the Departure Arrival function key. The Departures page is used to select the departure runway, SID, and transition for the route origin airport. Notice the departure runway is already selected because it was entered on page 1 of the route page. ACT indicates that the runway is already part of the active route. Before we select the departure, let's look at the Departure Arrival Index page. The Departure Arrival Index page is used to select the departure or arrival page for the origin or destination airports of the route. When a second route is entered, the departures or arrivals for Route 2 airports can be selected here. Departures or arrivals for other airports may be displayed by entering the Airport ICAO identifier in these lines. Although departures and arrivals for other airports can be displayed, only departures and arrivals for the origin and destination airports can be selected. Now return to the Departures page for KBFI. Select the SID for your flight. SEL indicates that the SID is selected. Also note the execute light is illuminated, indicating a modification is being made to the route. If we could see route page 1, it would show mod in the page title, indicating the route is being modified. An erase key appears, allowing you to erase the modifications and display the original active route. Let's use the erase key to erase the modifications. The route modifications are now erased and the original active route is displayed. Notice the execute light is not illuminated. Now, re-enter the SID to continue with the departure. The transitions available for the selected SID are listed here. Transitions are part of the departure procedure and are designed to put you onto or near your intended route of flight. You can select Orton, Hump, or Vamps, depending on your direction of flight. Select the transition appropriate for your routing. Return to the route page. Display page 2 to check the modifications. The modifications are shown. The selected departure and transition are displayed as the first route segment. A route discontinuity is also displayed. Discontinuities can be resolved by connecting the route segments. ATC clears you from the departure transition at Orton direct to Alder. The waypoint Alder is located on J1. Connecting Orton with Alder joins the two route segments. Enter Alder into the boxes to resolve the discontinuity. Make the modifications active. The route entry portion of the pre-flight is now complete. You can load and store a second route in the FMC. Route 2 may be entered and modified at any time without affecting Route 1. However, once Route 2 is activated, and executed, it becomes the active route and Route 1 becomes inactive. The route copy key copies the active route into the inactive route. Copy active Route 1 into Route 2. Display Route 2 to see the copied information. Inactive Route 2 is displayed. Display page 2 to see the rest of the data. An inactive copy of Route 1 is now in Route 2. You could modify Route 2 in anticipation of a SID or runway change. You could then switch quickly to this route by making it active. You could also modify Route 2 to include an alternate destination. Or Route 2 could include a commonly known ATC routing change. Recall, the route page only displays route segments, while the route legs pages show all waypoints on the route, including all waypoints between the beginning and ending points of entered airway segments. Now select the route legs page. Just like old paper flight logs, each line on the route legs page corresponds to a similar line on the flight log. The information includes the waypoint identifier, the leg direction, the leg length, the speed, and the altitude. All waypoints making up the route are displayed on the route legs pages in the order they will be flown. This is page 1 of 3 legs pages for the active route. The next page and previous page keys can be used to display pages 2 and 3. The waypoint sequence may be changed and new waypoints may be added or deleted. You'll see how to add, delete, and manipulate the waypoints to accommodate ATC clearances in a later lesson. The first waypoint on active route legs page 1 is the active waypoint. Waypoint identifiers can be names, latitude-longitude coordinates, or conditional. Latitude and longitude waypoints are displayed on the legs page in abbreviated format. To see the exact coordinates, line select the waypoint to the scratch pad. The precise latitude-longitude coordinates appear in the scratch pad. Clear the scratch pad to continue. Conditional waypoints are not fixed geographical positions. Conditional waypoints require you to maintain a heading or fly a procedure until a condition is satisfied. The first waypoint on the Laker 3 departure requires you to maintain a heading of 130 until reaching 1,000 feet. Your position passing this altitude will depend on gross weight, wind, and takeoff technique. Conditional waypoints cannot be entered directly. They can only be entered as part of a departure or arrival procedure. They can be deleted. Boxes are displayed in place of a waypoint identifier when a route discontinuity occurs. Dashes are displayed on the line following the end of the route. The leg direction is displayed in the header line just above the waypoint identifier. These are the FMC computed courses to waypoints. And this is a procedure to find heading to a waypoint. All leg directions are magnetic unless otherwise indicated. True headings are indicated by a T. Other possible leg direction indications are procedure turn, hold at, and DME arc, which are discussed in a later lesson. For the active leg, the FMC displays the distance from the airplane to the active waypoint. For other legs, the FMC displays the computed distance between waypoints. Predicted speed and altitude at which each waypoint will be crossed is displayed here. Speed and altitude restrictions can also be entered, either manually or automatically as part of a procedure. Manually or automatically entered restrictions are displayed in large font. And FMC predicted speeds and altitudes are displayed in small font. Airspeed restrictions, followed by a slash, are entered on the desired waypoint line. An airspeed restriction must have an altitude restriction associated with it. An airspeed restriction cannot be added to an FMC predicted altitude. A clearance has just been received to cross Laker at 240 knots. Make this modification. The speed restriction is displayed in large font. The page title indicates a modification is being made, and the execute light is illuminated. The erase prompt allows the modification to be removed should you change your mind. Make the modification active. Waypoint altitude restrictions are entered in several formats. First, to cross a waypoint at a specific altitude, simply enter the altitude on the appropriate waypoint line. In this example, since Laker already has an altitude restriction, simply enter the new restriction over the old. Make the modification active. Second, to cross a waypoint at or above or at or below an altitude, enter the altitude followed by an A for above or B for below. Comply with the clearance to cross Laker at or below 2,500 feet. For now, erase this modification and we'll try another one. During climb, to cross a waypoint between two altitudes, enter the lower altitude followed by an A, then the higher altitude followed by a B. Comply with the clearance to cross Laker between 2,000 and 3,000 feet. Make this modification active. During descent, the same restriction to cross between 2,000 and 3,000 feet is entered with the altitudes reversed, the higher altitude first. To delete altitude and airspeed restrictions, simply push the Delete key and select the waypoint restriction to be deleted. ATC has canceled the restriction at Laker. Comply with the clearance by deleting the airspeed and altitude restrictions at Laker. Make this modification active. If a waypoint has an airspeed and altitude restriction, you cannot delete only one of the restrictions. Both are deleted. The FMC begins providing navigation commands to the autoflight system when LNAV is engaged. And climb commands for the vertical profile when VNAV is engaged. The FMC commands a VNAV climb to remain within all airspeed and altitude constraints associated with the departure procedure and the climb profile entered during pre-flight. The climb page is used to monitor and modify the climb profile if necessary. A basic climb profile consists of three segments: the takeoff segment, the speed transition segment, and the economy speed segment. During the takeoff segment, the flight director commands a climb speed of V2 plus 15 knots. The takeoff segment ends at the flap retraction acceleration height. This height was entered on the takeoff reference page during pre-flight. In the speed transition segment, the FMC commands acceleration to the transition speed, usually 250 knots. Flaps are retracted during the acceleration. The speed transition segment typically ends at 10,000 feet. In the economy speed segment, the FMC commands economy climb speed. Economy speed is based on the cost index entered during pre-flight. The economy speed segment ends when the cruise altitude is reached. Now let's look at the VNAV climb page. Pushing the VNAV key in flight displays the correct VNAV page for the current phase of flight: climb, cruise, or descent. Display the VNAV climb page. With the aircraft in the climb phase, pressing the VNAV key displays the climb page. Access to other VNAV pages is then provided by the next page and previous page keys. These pages will be discussed in other lessons. Let's return to the climb page. The title of the climb page indicates the current active climb mode. During the takeoff segment, the airplane climbs at V2 plus 15 knots. V2 was entered on the takeoff reference page during pre-flight. After reaching flap retraction acceleration height, the FMC commands acceleration to the transition speed. Flaps are retracted as the aircraft accelerates. The transition speed becomes the active climb speed. Upon reaching the speed transition altitude, the speed transition line blanks, and the economy climb speed becomes the active climb speed. Economy climb speed is maintained until reaching cruise altitude. The basic climb profile can be modified as necessary using the climb page. For example, suppose a change to max angle climb speed is desired. Max angle climb speed is calculated by the FMC and is displayed on the climb page. To change the active climb speed to max angle climb speed, first copy the max angle climb speed to the scratch pad. Then enter the maximum angle climb speed into the economy speed line. the economy speed line title changes to Selected Speed. The page title changes to Modified 250 knot climb. And the Execute light illuminates. Push the Execute key to make the speed modification active. The selected speed is now max angle climb speed, and the page title indicates active 230 knot climb. The airplane now climbs at the max angle climb speed. If a maximum angle climb is required after takeoff to clear an obstacle, the max angle speed and obstacle clearance altitude can be entered in the speed restriction line during pre-flight. Use max angle speed and enter the speed restriction required to clear the tower on the hill at the end of the runway. Both speed and altitude are required for a speed restriction entry. Enter this data into the correct line. After flap retraction, 230 knots becomes the active climb speed. After reaching the speed restriction altitude, the speed restriction line blanks. And the FMC commands an acceleration to the normal 250 knots below 10,000 feet. Before reaching 10,000 feet, suppose ATC cancels the 250 knot speed restriction and clears you for an unrestricted climb to your cruise altitude. Use the Delete key to delete the 250. The speed transition line disappears and the climb page title changes to an active economy climb. With the speed transition deleted, the airplane accelerates to and climbs at economy speed until reaching cruise altitude. During climb, if ATC clears you to a new cruise altitude, the new cruise altitude can be entered in the cruise altitude line on the climb page. Enter flight level 370 as the new cruise altitude. The cruise altitude change is a modification to the climb profile and requires execution to become active. Make the change active. The new cruise altitude becomes the FMC target altitude. Remember to also increase the altitude in the MCP altitude window. Next, let's look at a departure procedure containing a climb profile with speed and altitude constraints, and how the constraints are displayed and modified on the climb page. We'll use the Laker 3 departure for the Boeing Field to Los Angeles route, and include the speed and altitude constraints from the legs page. Laker and the intercept waypoint have speed and altitude constraints. Orton and Alder have only altitude constraints. Display the climb page. When speed or altitude constraints are included in the route, the next constraint is displayed on the climb page waypoint constraint line. As the waypoint with the constraint is passed during climb, it is replaced by the next waypoint with a constraint. If the FMC predicts that, with the current climb gradient, the airplane will not satisfy a waypoint constraint, the error line showing the predicted undershoot is displayed. The message, "Unable next altitude," is displayed in the scratch pad. In this case, The FMC predicts the airplane will be 350 feet low as it crosses Laker. The FMC also predicts the airplane will not reach 2,500 feet until 2 nautical miles beyond Laker. When speed or altitude constraints are included in the route, the Climb Direct prompt is also displayed on the Climb page. The Climb Direct function can be used to delete altitude constraints between the current airplane altitude and the MCP altitude. ATC has canceled the altitude restrictions at Orton and Alder. To comply with the ATC clearance, first set cruise altitude in the MCP altitude window. Now, push Climb Direct and execute the modification. Notice the change in the VNAV path. All waypoint constraints between your current altitude and flight level 330 have been deleted. The Climb Direct and waypoint constraint prompts disappear because all waypoint constraints have been deleted. As the airplane levels off at cruise altitude, the VNAV climb page changes to the cruise page. If the cruise page is not displayed when the airplane levels off, the VNAV key may be used to display it. Display the cruise page. Note that the cruise page is VNAV page 2 of 3. The previous page and next page keys may be used to display the climb or descent pages. To illustrate this, display the descent page. Now display the cruise page again. As on the climb page, the active airspeed and altitude are displayed here. The target airspeed at level off is economy, as indicated by the page title and target speed line. The N1 line displays the target N1 necessary to hold the target airspeed. The ETA and fuel predictions for the destination are displayed here. Flight plan modifications are also included in the ETA and fuel estimates. Optimum altitude is shown here. Optimum altitude is the most economical altitude at current gross weight. The maximum altitude is the highest altitude possible based on current gross weight, airspeed, and number of engines operating. The recommended flight level shows here. The recommended flight level is the most economical altitude based on airplane performance and winds. The economy speed displayed on the cruise page is the least cost airspeed for the trip and is based on the cost index entered during pre-flight. LRC, or long-range cruise speed, is the airspeed for maximum range. It ignores the cost index. Select long-range cruise for maximum range. Execute the modification. The long-range cruise airspeed is now active and the speed line displays the computed value. Economy airspeed can be selected when long-range cruise airspeed is no longer desired. Select economy airspeed. Execute the modification. Economy airspeed is now active again. In addition to economy and long-range cruise, any desired airspeed or Mach number may be entered into the target speed line.
On long flights, step climbs increase fuel economy. Step information is displayed here. When the airplane is more than 500 miles from the destination airport and more than 200 miles from the top of descent. The Step 2 altitude is the cruise altitude plus the selected step size. The crew may manually overwrite the Step 2 altitude.
The step size is ICAO. The crew may change the step size by entering any altitude between 0 and 9,000 feet in 1,000-foot increments. The FMC calculated time and distance to the most economical step climb point are displayed here.
Change the step size to 2,000 feet. The Step 2 altitude is now based on the new step size. At the step point, the time and distance change to now. The airplane does not climb automatically. To climb to the step altitude, first reset the MCP altitude to the new cruise altitude.
Now push the altitude selector to set the new cruise altitude in the FMC.
The cruise page title displays cruise climb or cruise descent when climbing or descending to a new cruise altitude. The page title returns to cruise at level off. The ETA and fuel prediction assumes that the step is accomplished at the step point. Deleting the crew entered step size returns the step size to ICAO. ICAO cannot be deleted. When using the cruise page to make a step climb, the FMC decides where the climb point will be. However, on the legs page, the crew can specify the step climb point. Display the legs page. Usually, altitude constraints cannot be entered into cruise waypoints. One exception is when entering a step climb altitude. The FMC assumes the step climb will be accomplished prior to Rogue Valley. To make the step climb at Red Bluff, enter the altitude at Red Bluff normally, but add the letter S to the end of it. Enter a step climb to flight level 370 at Red Bluff. Execute the modification. The step climb to flight level 370 now begins at Red Bluff. Select the cruise page to monitor the step climb. Set the MCP to the step altitude at Red Bluff.
Now push the altitude selector to set the new cruise altitude in the FMC.
The cruise page changes to the cruise climb page as before, and the airplane climbs at economy cruise speed. The cruise page is again displayed after level off. The FMC provides data about your flight progress to satisfy any ATC request for information. Every route legs page and associated waypoints has a corresponding route data page. The route data page displays ETA information for each route waypoint, fuel remaining for each route waypoint, and access to the waypoint wind pages, which we'll talk about in a moment. The route data page is displayed from the route legs page using the route data prompt. Select Route Data Page 2. The previous page and next page keys are used to move back and forth between route data pages in the same way they are used with other pages. The legs key or the legs prompt can be used to display route legs again. Returning to route legs with the legs key always displays route legs page 1 regardless of the page display. The legs prompt returns to the corresponding route legs page. The FMC fuel and ETA predictions can be unreliable because of unforecast headwinds or tailwinds. The route data pages provide access to waypoint wind pages. The pages allow you to enter wind information for any route waypoint. A W indicates that wind data has already been entered for these waypoints. Display the wind page for Battleground. For each waypoint, up to 4 altitudes can be entered, along with associated wind direction and speed. A known outside air temperature may be entered to update temperature information.
To enter new wind information for flight level 390, first enter the altitude on this line.
The wind data is sorted and displayed by altitude regardless of the order entered. Now enter wind direction and speed on the right. Execute the modification.
Next, enter the OAT for flight level 240. Enter this data into the correct line.
Execute the modification. The entered temperature is propagated to all altitudes using a standard lapse rate. The ETA and fuel predictions for Battleground and all subsequent waypoints are now updated.
As the flight progresses along the programmed route, information about the progress of the flight is available on the progress page. Display the progress page. The progress page title includes the flight number entered during pre-flight on the route page. The progress page displays the distance to go, ETA, and fuel remaining for the active waypoint. For the waypoint immediately after the active waypoint, and for the destination. The active airspeed is also displayed. If a flight plan modification is being made on another CDU page, the destination line changes to mod during the modification, and the destination estimates include the effect of the modification. Executing or erasing the modification returns the title to destination. The destination line can also be used to evaluate waypoints along the route and off the route. Enter the flight plan waypoint Oakland into the destination line. The destination line title changes to en route waypoint, and the information displayed is based on flying the flight plan route to Oakland. Waypoints not in the flight plan may be evaluated also. For example, enter waypoint Lakeview. The title now changes to Direct to Fix, and the information is based on flying direct to Lakeview. The destination information can be restored by deleting the waypoint. Delete waypoint Lakeview. During climb, ETA and distance to top of climb is displayed here. After leveling and cruise flight, the ETA and distance values change to show the step climb point. Step climb data is only displayed if more than 200 miles from the top of descent point. When within 200 miles of top of descent point, ETA and distance to top of descent is shown. After passing the top of descent point, ETA and distance to end of descent is shown. During engine out drift down, the ETA and distance to level off is shown. Now, display Progress Page 2. Progress Page 2 displays wind direction and speed relative to true north, and the wind components relative to the airplane's heading. The page also displays cross-track errors, vertical track errors during VNAV descents, current true airspeed, and the outside static air temperature. The fuel used by each engine and total fuel used, as sensed by the engine fuel flow sensors, is displayed here. The current fuel remaining is displayed here. The totalizer value is the fuel on board as sensed by the fuel quantity indicating system. Calculated fuel is fuel on board before engine start, minus fuel used by the engines. FMC performance calculations are based on the calculated fuel value. Now, display Progress Page 3, the RTA Progress page. Sometimes we must control our flight to arrive at our destination, or at a certain waypoint at a specific time. The RTA Progress page is an executable page that allows us to designate a required time of arrival, or RTA. For example, ATC requests we cross Oakland at 1730 Zulu to sequence our arrival into Los Angeles. First, enter Oakland into the fix line. The predicted altitude and ETA to Oakland based on the existing flight plan displays here. Next, enter the desired arrival time, 1730. The page title changes to Mod, and the computed RTA speed required to reach the fix at the RTA is displayed. To designate the RTA time as at or before, add a B to the scratchpad entry. Add an A to designate the time as at or after. Execute the modification. The page title is now Active RTA Progress, and the ETA has changed to reflect the RTA. The RTA speed will be maintained to the RTA fix. The FMC will use any speed up to the maximum speed displayed here to achieve the RTA time. You can enter a different maximum speed if desired. Now select the cruise page. The cruise page also displays the RTA speed as the target speed. Selecting and executing another speed on the cruise page or deleting the RTA waypoint on the route legs page deletes the RTA. RTAs can also be entered on the ground. When entered on the ground, the FMC displays a recommended takeoff time. This time is based on using the most economical profile to the RTA point. You may enter a different takeoff time if desired. The FMC then recalculates the RTA speed based on the entered time. Crew entered times display in large font. Deleting the entered time returns the display to recommended time. When the recommended takeoff time arrives, the recommended takeoff time changes to now. Either in flight or on the ground, enable RTA displays when conditions are such that the airplane cannot meet the RTA. Position reports are sometimes required during flight. The FMC has a position report page to help with those reports. The position report page can be found using the position report prompt on Progress Page 1. Display Progress Page 1. Select the position report page. The position report page has all the information needed to make a position report. It shows the actual time of arrival and altitude at the last waypoint, the ETA for the active waypoint, the next waypoint name, and the destination ETA. Current static air temperature, true wind, and target speed are also displayed, as well as fuel remaining at the previous waypoint.
Information about nav aids, waypoints, airports, and destination runways is available in the FMC through the RefNav data page. The RefNav data page is accessed through the Initialization Reference Index. Select the Initialization Reference Index. Now select Nav Data. To obtain information about a nav aid, airport, or waypoint, enter the identifier on the ident line. For example, enter LKV, the identifier for Lakeview VOR.
Information provided varies with the identifier entered. For VORs, frequency, latitude, and longitude, magnetic variation, and elevation are shown.
For waypoints, only latitude and longitude are shown. For airports, the latitude and longitude and elevation are shown.
You can also obtain destination runway information. When a valid destination runway is entered, the runway length is also shown.
Before leaving the RefNav data page, let's discuss radio nav aid inhibits.
The FMC uses radio nav aids as one source of position updating. Updating from specific radio nav aids can be inhibited when a nav aid is known to be transmitting invalid signals. Up to 2 nav aids can be inhibited by entering their identifiers on the nav aid inhibit lines. nav aids such as VORs, VOR DME, Vortec, or DMEs can be inhibited. Enter Lakeview in the left nav aid inhibit data line. All position information from Lakeview is now inhibited.
Entering an identifier on either of these two lines inhibits only the VOR signal. Enter the Kimberly VOR identifier into the left VOR inhibit data line. The DME signal is not inhibited and is still available for position updating. Selecting VOR DME nav off prevents all VOR DME updating of the FMC. Turn off VOR DME updating. The VOR only inhibit displays all when VOR DME updating is turned off. However, DME updating is still allowed. Let's discuss position and position updating a little further. First, display Position Reference Page 2 from the Initialization Reference Index. You can also get to this page directly from Progress Page 1.
This page displays the computed inertial position for the three IRSs. The GPS position as computed by the GPS receivers, and the radio position.
A measure of the accuracy for each position displays here. The value represents the accuracy in nautical miles.
The IRS, GPS, and radio positions are then used by the FMC to calculate the FMC position. The FMC position is used for all navigation calculations. The FMC position is based on the IRS position adjusted with updates from available navigation signals. The FMC position is continually updated from the GPS or navigation radios. The primary source of position update displays in parentheses. Updating priority is based on the availability of valid data from the supporting systems and the phase of flight.
The accuracy of the FMC position displays here. FMC accuracy is normally the same as the primary source. Required Navigation Performance, or RNP, is the required accuracy of the FMC position, also expressed in nautical miles.
The small font RNP value displayed is the default database value, which varies with the phase of flight. You may enter RNP values that are greater or smaller than the FMC values. Manually entered values appear in large font. When an RNP value is entered that is greater than the FMC value, Verify RNP Entry displays. During approaches, the ICAS caution message Unable RNP displays if the actual value is greater than RNP requirements.
The ICAS message displays as an advisory during all other phases of flight. The specific nav aids and type of nav aids providing the radio position are shown here.
To show the IRS, GPS, and radio positions relative to the FMC position, select the bearing distance prompt.
The bearing and distance displayed for all position sources is relative to the FMC position. For example, the radio position shows a bearing of 260 degrees and a distance of 0.4 nautical miles. Sometimes in flight, the FMC position may drift away from the actual position. If this happens, the FMC may be manually updated with the position from another navigation system. Select the Update Arm prompt.
The FMC can be updated to the IRS, GPS, or radio position using the Now prompts. Update the FMC position to the GPS position. The FMC position is immediately updated to the GPS position. Note that this is a momentary position update, and GPS remains the primary source for updating IRS position errors. Before leaving this lesson, let's look at position reference pages 3 and 4. Display position reference page 3.
Position reference page 3 displays the position of each GPS receiver and each FMC position. Primary indicates the FMC which is currently being used for navigation. The crew cannot select which GPS receiver provides the updating to the FMCs. However, GPS updating to the FMCs can be turned on or off. Turn off GPS updating.
GPS updating is now turned off. Return to position reference page 2.
Radio position is now the primary source of FMC position updating.
The inertial position displayed here is derived from the 3 independent IRS positions. Position reference page 4 shows the computed position for each of the 3 IRSs. Display position reference page 4. The left, center, and right IRS positions are displayed. The FMC computed ground speed for each IRS is also displayed. The 3 positions are mixed for display on position reference page 2. If the data from 1 or 2 of the IRSs is invalid, a single valid IRS source is shown. When no IRS data is valid, a blank is displayed. Display the hold page. Pushing the hold key displays a hold at line at the bottom of the root legs page. Select the present position prompt to hold at your current position. The hold page displays data for a standard holding pattern on your route of flight. The holding fix is displayed as a latitude-longitude waypoint on both the hold page and the legs page. Making the modification active causes the airplane to enter holding immediately. Erase the modification. Instead of modifying the route and then creating the holding pattern, both the fix and pattern can be added to the route at the same time. To see how this works, display the hold page again. Enter ROM into the hold at boxes to comply with the new clearance. Since ROM is not a waypoint in the active route, the data appears in the scratch pad. It can be entered into the route of flight at any point after the active waypoint. In this case, enter it into the route immediately after the active waypoint. The hold page displays data for a standard pattern on a course direct to the fix. Since your clearance specified the 306-degree radial, enter this radial into the quad radial line. The quadrant displays the inbound course changes to the reciprocal of the radial, and the holding pattern display changes. Make the modification active. Display the legs page. The FMC automatically entered ROM as a waypoint and as a holding fix. A discontinuity occurs until follow-on routing is resolved. You are now inbound to the holding fix. Display the hold page again. The FMC calculates the optimum speed for holding based on current altitude, gross weight, and flap setting. VNAV commands this speed as holding speed. It is the flight crew's responsibility to verify that the speed complies with ATC rules for holding. If a different speed is desired, it can be entered here on the legs page, or here on the hold page. Enter 240 as your speed and 370 as the target altitude on the hold page. Make the modification active. VNAV reduces airspeed to cross the fix at the holding speed. The holding pattern becomes active upon reaching the fix. LNAV determines the type of entry based on airplane track to the holding fix. The FMC computes holding patterns based on current wind and FMC commanded airspeed. LNAV uses up to a 30-degree angle to track the pattern. The arrival procedure has been entered for you and the discontinuity after ROM has been resolved. Select the Exit Hold prompt. The Exit Hold prompt changes to Exit Armed. When the Execute key is pushed, the airplane will exit the holding pattern the next time it crosses the holding fix. The exit path depends on the airplane position in the pattern. Make the modification active. In this example, the airplane turns immediately to the inbound leg while maintaining holding airspeed and altitude. At ROM, the the airplane exits holding and returns to the VNAV computed profile. You are now descending to flight level 250. Enter the new holding pattern. Holding pattern data for the missed approach procedure appears since it is part of the active route. Use the next hold prompt to enter another hold. Enter raise into the hold at boxes.
Continue.
Since raise was already a route waypoint, the holding pattern is automatically entered on the legs page. Using the flight plan course to the fix. Now, build the pattern according to the ATC clearance. Enter L for a left turn. The FMC enters a leg time based on your altitude. Now enter 10 into the leg distance line. Entering a leg distance overrides the leg time. Check that the speed target altitude data is OK. Since you are cleared to flight level 250, enter this as your target altitude. Make the modification active. Notice that the page number corresponds to the sequence and total number of holding patterns in the route. To view multiple hold pages, use the previous page and next page keys. You have entered holding at raise. The Fix ETA line displays the time you expect to cross the holding fix again. ETAs at downtrack waypoints are based on this time. Enter the time you expect to depart the holding fix into this line. Make the modification active. ETAs and fuel predictions at downtrack waypoints are now based on departing the holding fix at the expect further clearance time. This line displays how much time is available to hold before you must exit in order to reach your destination with your entered fuel reserves still on board. Display the legs page. Now, modify your route to proceed direct to Sadie. Make the modification active. The holding pattern disappears and the airplane returns to the VNAV profile as you continue your descent. You are approaching Sadie and descending. Display the hold page. Use the next hold prompt. Enter the new holding fix into the boxes. Verify that the turn direction is correct, then enter the speed and target altitude. Make the modification active. ATC has canceled the hold and cleared you to continue the approach. Display the legs page. Use the delete key to delete the hold at fix. Resolve the discontinuity. Make the modification active. There are days when air traffic control just won't leave you alone to fly the route as you planned it. Let's look at how we can use the CDU to comply with ATC instructions. Since the legs page lists the flight plan's waypoints in the order they will be flown, this is the page used for route modifications. To comply with this clearance, we need to delete Red Bluff from the route. Use the Delete key to delete Red Bluff. Execute the modification. Any waypoint except the active waypoint can be deleted with the Delete key. When deleting a waypoint, the FMC always inserts a route discontinuity in place of the deleted waypoint. A route discontinuity is merely two route segments that are not connected. After passing Rogue Valley, there is no FMC course guidance. The airplane continues straight ahead after Rogue Valley unless the discontinuity is resolved. Oakland is the desired waypoint after Rogue Valley. Therefore, to comply with the clearance and resolve the discontinuity, insert Oakland after Rogue Valley. Execute the modification. The discontinuity is now resolved and course guidance is provided after Rogue Valley. All of the waypoints below Oakland move up in the list and maintain the same relative position. With this clearance, Red Bluff is the desired waypoint after Rogue Valley. Insert Red Bluff on the line after Rogue Valley. Inserting a new waypoint creates a route discontinuity in the same way as deleting waypoints. This time, let's resolve the discontinuity before executing. Now, execute the modification. The waypoints below Oakland remain unchanged.
Waypoints can be deleted one at a time with the Delete key, but when multiple waypoints must be deleted, there is an easier way.
Oakland is the desired active waypoint. Simply move Oakland up the list to the active waypoint line. Both Rogue Valley and Red Bluff are bypassed and removed from the route. The waypoints below Oakland move up. Note that this method of bypassing waypoints rather than deleting them avoids a route discontinuity. At times, it may be necessary to know when we pass a beam of bypassed waypoints. Pushing a beam points before executing creates a beam waypoints for each bypassed waypoint. Selected appears when the abeam points are created. Now execute the modification. The abeam waypoints now appear as part of the active route. The FMC assigns sequence numbers to created waypoints. Numbers are assigned in sequence, beginning with 01. Once a number is used, it is not used again for the rest of the flight, even if the waypoint is deleted from the route. To comply with this clearance, enter CATSO after Rogue Valley. Sometimes our clearance includes a geographic location that is not in the FMC database. When this happens, the message "Not in Database" displays. Clear the scratchpad message and clear CATSO. Waypoints not in the FMC database can be created by reference to other FMC waypoints. Three types of references are possible. The first is the Place Bearing Distance waypoint. The second reference is the place-bearing waypoint. The third type of reference, the along track waypoint, will be discussed later in this lesson. Now, let's return to the example for CATSO. We see from our aeronautical chart that CATSO is located on the 080 radial from the Sacramento VOR at 49 nautical miles. Create a place-bearing distance waypoint for CATSO and enter the waypoint into the route after Rogue Valley. Remember to separate the bearing and distance numbers with a slash. The FMC assigns a sequence number to this created waypoint in the same manner as the ABEAM waypoints in an earlier example. Erase the modification. From our chart, we see that CATSO is also defined as the intersection of the Sacramento 080 radial and the Linden 029 radial. Create a place-bearing waypoint for CATSO by entering the Sacramento VOR and radial followed by the Linden VOR and radial. Again, remember to use a slash to separate the two parameters. The FMC abbreviates this created waypoint in the same manner as the previous place-bearing distance waypoint. If the order of entry of the identifiers and bearings is reversed, the FMC uses the first identifier entered to identify the waypoint. Erase the modification. Now let's discuss the along track waypoint. This type of waypoint differs from the two previous types in that the reference waypoint must be part of the current active route. For along track waypoints occurring after the reference waypoint, enter the reference waypoint into the scratchpad, followed by a slash and the distance after the reference waypoint. For along track waypoints occurring before the reference waypoint, place a minus sign in front of the distance. Always enter an along track waypoint on the same line as the reference waypoint. The minus sign or no sign tells the FMC which direction from the reference waypoint is the correct position in the list. Now, enter this along track waypoint. Previously, you saw that entering new route waypoints created a route discontinuity. However, since along track waypoints are part of the existing flight plan, a discontinuity is not created. Execute the modification. When flying over large bodies of water, the only waypoints available are defined by latitude and longitude. To create waypoints with latitude and longitude, the latitude and longitude is entered into the scratchpad and then entered into the waypoint list on the correct line just as with other waypoints. To demonstrate this, let's resolve this route discontinuity by entering the latitude and longitude for Oakland into the correct line. For latitude and longitude waypoints, the FMC assigns a 7-character format using the first 2 digits of the latitude and the first 3 digits of the longitude. The FMC does not recognize this latitude and longitude waypoint as being the same place as Oakland. A route discontinuity is inserted as with any other new waypoint. Avenal is the desired waypoint after Oakland, north 37 west 122. Resolve the discontinuity. Execute the modification. During long ocean crossings, you may want to mark where your route crosses longitude lines. ATC has requested you report at west 144 degrees. West 144 degrees crosses the flight plan between waypoints Happy and Hiccup. The waypoint west 144 may be entered anywhere in the flight plan. The FMC then figures out where the waypoint belongs. A good technique is to always enter the waypoint into the active waypoint line. Enter west 144 into the route. The FMC has calculated and entered the waypoint into your flight plan between Happy and Hiccup. There is another feature of latitude-longitude reporting points, so let's erase the modification before. The clearance may be to report at multiple points spaced by equal number of degrees. Enter west 144-4 to make the FMC compute waypoints every 4 degrees. The FMC has calculated all the longitude waypoints that intersect the flight plan route. Latitude reporting points are entered the same as longitude reporting points. ATC has instructed us to fly direct to Lakeview. To create a course direct to Lakeview, enter Lakeview into the active waypoint line. The FMC computed direct course to Lakeview displays over Lakeview. Now resolve the route discontinuity. There may be times when we want to keep a copy of the unmodified route. Pushing the route copy key before executing copies the active unmodified route into the inactive route. Copy the active route into the inactive route. Complete displays when the copy operation is complete. Previous inactive route data is erased. Now execute the modification. ATC has now instructed us to intercept and fly a course other than a direct course to Lakeview to avoid weather. To comply with this clearance, we begin by turning to a heading of 120 degrees using heading select. Next, enter Lakeview on the active waypoint line as before, as if going direct to Lakeview. The FMC computed direct course is displayed over Lakeview as before. However, this time the direct course must be modified to the required intercept course before executing. Since our course clearance refers to the 350-degree radial of Lakeview, the desired intercept course to Lakeview is 170 degrees, the reciprocal of the radial. Enter the course on the intercept course to line. The intercept course now displays over Lakeview and on the intercept course to line. Now resolve the route discontinuity. Execute the modification. After execution, don't forget to rearm LNAV to capture the intercept course. This clearance can be entered as a course from present position. Enter P/P followed by the desired course into the active waypoint line. Make the modification active. The active waypoint line displays the course you entered, and a route discontinuity is generated. LNAV now follows this course. For this clearance, the discontinuity is resolved by connecting the flight plan route with the course you just entered. Note that the entered course crosses the flight plan route on J3 between Lakeview and Red Bluff. Enter Red Bluff into the route discontinuity boxes. The FMC creates a waypoint at the point where the course intercepts the flight plan route. Make the modification active. The airplane will fly the entered course and then intercept the flight plan route. Similar to the intercept course from present position, the FMC can also intercept courses outbound from waypoints. For waypoints on the active route, the waypoint name followed by the desired outbound course is entered after the respective waypoint. If the waypoint is not on the active route, this entry must be made to the active waypoint line. Here is your clearance. First, enter the clearance as a course outbound from Lakeview.
Enter this data into the correct line.
Intercept course from information does not display since the entry was not made to the active waypoint line.
Enter the data as shown and select the correct key.
Make the modification active. Normally, in-flight modifications to the route are made on the route legs pages. However, the route pages can be used for some in-flight modifications. Display the route page. In flight, pushing the route key always displays route page 2. On the ground, it displays route page 1. On the route page, route segments can be added and bypassed, but cannot be deleted. To add this route segment, begin by entering Lakeview on top of Avenal in the first to line. The FMC assumes the route segment is direct. If the clearance includes an airway, it must be manually entered here. Now enter Red Bluff in the line after Lakeview. Execute the modification. Route segments are bypassed just as waypoints are bypassed on the route legs pages. Comply with this clearance by entering Avenal on top of Rogue Valley in the first 2 line. Execute the modification. Another feature of the route page is the ability to intercept airways. Enter the airway into line 1.
The FMC creates a discontinuity between J7 and the original route and displays boxes for the airway endpoint entry. Enter the airway endpoint raise. The FMC determines the airway waypoint closest to the airplane's present position and anchors the airway on that point. The airway segment between the anchor point and the endpoint is displayed on the map. Execute the modification. The anchor point displays as the active waypoint until LNAV intercepts the airway. Once LNAV intercepts the airway, the FMC sequences the anchor point and the next waypoint on the airway becomes the active waypoint. If you plan to cross the airway somewhere else, you must create an intercept course to the appropriate waypoint on the route legs page to get FMC sequencing.
Route offsets are sometimes required by traffic conflicts and sometimes by weather. A route offset is entered on the route page. Display the route page. Offsets up to 99 miles to the left or right of course may be flown by entering the offset direction and distance in the offset line. Comply with this clearance. Enter L for left, followed by the offset distance. Like other route modifications, the route offset first appears as a dashed white line. Now execute the modification. The original route remains displayed, and the route offset changes to a dashed magenta line. LNAV turns the airplane to intercept and fly the route offset. The CDU offset light indicates LNAV guidance is based on the route offset.
The route offset extends to the last waypoint in the original route, or a discontinuity, approach transition, holding pattern, or a course change of greater than 135 degrees is reached.
An FMC message appears when you are 2 minutes from the end of the route offset. Usually, ATC cancels an offset before this point is reached. To remove the offset and return to the original route, enter a 0 into the offset line and then execute. Make the modification active. LNAV returns the airplane to the original route. The route offset can also be removed by using the delete key to delete the offset data, or by proceeding direct to a waypoint. Now let's look at another FMC page. Display the Fix Information page.
Information about the flight plan route relative to a fix can be obtained using this page. Acceptable identifiers include airports, nav aids, or waypoints.
There are 2 Fix Info pages. They are the same, allowing the entry and display of 2 different fixes at the same time. Enter the waypoint Ducky in the fix line. The fix line now displays the bearing and distance from the waypoint to your airplane. ATC wants to know when you'll be abeam Ducky. Select the abeam prompt. Bearing and distance from the waypoint to the nearest point of intersection with the route are displayed. The current distance to go to the abeam point and the ETA and predicted altitude at that point are also displayed. Let's use the Fix Information page to create a new route waypoint at the abeam point. First, select the abeam line. The abeam point appears in Place Bearing Distance format in the scratch pad. Next, display the legs page. The abeam point is between Oakland 01 and Avenal 02. Enter the new waypoint after Oakland 01. Resolve the discontinuity. Make the modification active. The new waypoint is correctly entered. Now display the Fix Information page again. Ducky and all related data can be removed with this prompt. Erase Ducky.
Note that the abeam point you put on the legs page remains as an en route waypoint. Your new clearance above requires that we find where the 247-degree radial off of Clovis CZQ VOR crosses our route. First, enter the VOR identifier in the fix line.
These lines are used to display data for up to 3 specific bearings or distances from the fix. Next, enter a bearing of 247 in the first bearing distance line. Like the abeam line, the bearing distance line displays time, distance, and altitude data relative to the specified bearing or radial and your route. Before you create a route waypoint from this intersection, let's look at some other examples of bearing distance line entries. You can also display where a specific distance from the fix intercepts your route. For example, enter /50 in the second bearing distance line. The slash tells the FMC it's a distance. Data is displayed for the nearest point of intersection of your route with the 50 nautical mile circle around the fix. When the point of intersection moves behind the airplane, only distance data is displayed. If you enter a bearing and a distance in the same line, the data lines remain blank regardless of the relationship to your route. If the bearing line or distance circle does not intercept the route, the corresponding distance or bearing is blank. Also, the time, distance, and altitude data remain blank. The FMC can calculate a point along the flight plan route that is based on an entered ETA or altitude. For example, enter the desired time and the predicted ETA altitude line. Z must be included to indicate the data is a time, not an altitude. The FMC displays the distance to the point where the airplane is predicted to be at the indicated time. A green circle is displayed at that point on the flight plan route. A standard altitude or flight level entry yields a similar display. The predicted point can be removed by using the delete key to delete the predicted ETA, or by flying past the point.
Flight 32 is ready to prepare for descent and arrival into Los Angeles. ATC clears Flight 32 for the SADE-6 arrival Avenal transition and the ILS runway 24 right with radar vectors. To load this clearance into the FMC, first display the Arrivals page. The Arrivals page for the destination airport is displayed because the airplane is more than halfway or more than 400 nautical miles along the route to the destination. Had these conditions not been met, the Arrivals page for the origin airport would be displayed. Stars and profile descents are displayed on the left. All approaches for this airport are displayed on the right. If more than 5 stars or approaches exist, more pages are available. Use the next page key to display KLAX Arrivals page 3. Select the SADE-6 star. Notice all stars except the selected one are removed from the display. All transitions associated with the selected star are now listed. These transitions are used to link the route to the star. Select the Avenal transition. Now, select the approach ILS runway 24 right. The approach includes missed approach routing and holding if the missed approach procedure is part of the published approach. Like the selected star, only the selected approach displays. Transitions associated with the selected approach are displayed under the selected approach. These transitions include the initial approach fix, feeder fixes, and fixes providing routing to the initial approach fix. Since this clearance is for radar vectors to the approach, no transition will be selected. Display the legs page to check the route modification for any route discontinuities. The original route to Santa Monica remains. Display page 2. Since the active routing ends at Santa Monica and the star transition begins at Avenal, there is a route discontinuity that must be resolved. The waypoints following the discontinuity are associated with the star-star transition and approach. Both the active waypoint and the first waypoint of the star transition are Avenal. Instead of using the delete key to delete the unwanted waypoints on the active route, select Avenal to the scratchpad and return to legs page 1. Line selecting the duplicate waypoint underneath the original waypoint will remove all waypoints between them and create a single waypoint. Do this now. Display legs page 2 and continue checking the route. The discontinuity on this page separates the end of the star from the approach. Since the clearance is for radar vectors after the star for the approach, this discontinuity does not have to be resolved. Continue checking the route. Displayed are waypoints associated with the approach. Continue checking the route. Now that you have finished checking the route, execute the modification. Display the Arrivals page to see the change. All stars and approaches for the destination airport are again displayed in order to allow for a new selection should ATC change the clearance. Display Arrivals page 2 and 3. the selected approach is shown as active, as is the selected star. After the approach and new routing have been loaded, the next action is to set the VREF speed. Display the approach reference page by pushing the initialization reference key. The approach reference page can always be displayed by pushing the initialization reference key when airborne. It can also be displayed through the initialization reference index page. Gross weight displays the FMC computed gross weight or crew entered weight. Entries not within the gross weight range result in the scratchpad message invalid entry. The FMC calculated VREF speeds at flaps 20, 25, and 30 are based upon the displayed gross weight value. Since we'll use flaps 30 for landing, select the VREF speed for flaps 30 and transfer it to the flap speed line. This entry displays the VREF speed on the ADI speed tape. Runway length and the ILS frequency and front course for the approach can be verified with the published approach charts. Now we are ready for descent and approach into Los Angeles. After being vectored for runway 24 right, the runway has been closed. Use the approach intercept feature on the arrivals page The approach intercept prompt provides a quick way to intercept a course to a defined waypoint on the selected approach. Honda is the approach intercept waypoint for the ILS for runway 25 left. Select the approach intercept prompt. The FMC displays the route legs page with Honda in the active waypoint line. The FMC assumes the approach course to the approach intercept waypoint. However, you may enter another course if desired. Execute the modification. Let's see what happens when we select an approach transition. Reselect the arrivals page. Note that the Honda intercept prompt remains displayed since the ILS for runway 25 left is active. Reselect the ILS. Select the RNIS transition. The approach intercept prompt remains Honda. To create an intercept course to RNIS, you must use the route legs page. After the missed approach due to an earthquake at Los Angeles, all runways are closed. An alternate airport needs to be selected. To display the alternate page, first select the index prompt. The alternate prompt on the initialization reference index page displays the alternate page. Select the alternate prompt. The alternate page can also be displayed through the alternate prompt on the route page. On this page, the FMC selects 4 potential alternate airports from the navigation database. The FMC ignores airports with runways shorter than an airline specified minimum. The alternates are displayed in order of ETA. The fuel data shows predicted arrival fuel at the corresponding alternate. Each of the 4 alternates has its own alternate page that can be selected with the appropriate line select key. These pages are discussed later. Any airport in the navigation database can also be manually entered as an alternate. Enter San Francisco International into the scratchpad and push any one of the 4-line select keys. Manual entries are displayed in large font. San Francisco International is automatically moved to the bottom of the list because it has the latest ETA. A manual entry can be deleted if it is not selected for diversion. Diversion selection is discussed later. Delete San Francisco International and notice that San Diego is again added to the alternate list. Up to 2 alternate airports can be inhibited from the FMC list by entering the airport identifier into the alternate inhibit line. Inhibit San Diego. Bakersfield is selected from the navigation database to replace San Diego. Airports can be removed from the alternate inhibit line by using the delete key. Delete San Diego. Since the FMC continuously selects the 4 closest alternates, San Diego is again added to the alternate list. The Divert Now prompt on this page loads a present position direct routing to the selected alternate airport displayed in its header. The FMC automatically selects the closest alternate. This selection is denoted by an A. However, any of the displayed alternates can be manually selected. Select Burbank to override the FMC alternate airport selection. Selected is displayed, and the Divert Now prompt now references Burbank. For practice, delete the manual selection of Burbank and return to the FMC selected alternate. Now push Long Beach is again chosen by the FMC. Select the Divert Now prompt to load a present position direct routing to Long Beach. The selected airport's diversion page displays for review and execution. Note that the routing is via direct to the alternate. For routings other than direct to an alternate, the alternate page for the desired airport should be used instead. Let's say we wish to divert to Ontario. Display the alternate page for Ontario by selecting the prompt opposite Ontario. Note that this is page 3 of 4 since Ontario is the 3rd airport in the alternate list. The other airport alternate pages display similar data. 3 routings are offered for the flight path to the alternate, and for illustration purposes, a route to Seal Beach VOR has been entered for you. A direct to, offset, or overhead routing can be selected. The FMC uses the selected routing to compute fuel and ETA predictions for all 4 alternates. The selected routing, indicated by SEL, can be changed using the appropriate line select key. The Direct To option is the default selection. Direct To results in direct routing from present position to the selected alternate airport. Now, enter an offset of right 5 miles in the offset line. Select the Offset option. Offset creates a route offset followed by a direct route to the alternate. Now, select the Overhead option. Overhead routing follows the existing flight plan route to the specified overhead waypoint, which is usually the next waypoint in the route, and then direct to the alternate airport. The overhead waypoint entry can be any waypoint on the active route. Enter Seal Beach VOR into the overhead line. The overhead routing is now along the active route to Seal Beach VOR and then direct to Ontario. A recommended diversion altitude and a recommended diversion speed may be displayed. Manual entries can also be made. Estimated average wind along the diversion route and OAT at an appropriate altitude can be entered. The ETA and fuel estimates are based on the displayed conditions. The engine out prompt on this page functions the same as the engine out prompt on the cruise page. The alternate prompt returns to the alternate page. Selecting the Divert Now prompt makes a route modification based on the selected routing. Select Divert Now. The diversion has been loaded into the route. Note that the page title has changed. An erase prompt is displayed and the execute light is illuminated. Also, only the selected diversion option displays and Divert Now changes to selected. Execute the modification. The overhead option is now active. Since the ceiling and visibility are unlimited at Ontario, let's load a visual arrival for our last approach of the day. Display the arrivals page. Notice that only precision and non-precision approaches are listed on page 1. Display page 2.
Available runways are listed to allow selection of a visual approach. Select the runway on which we were cleared to make the visual approach. The VFR approach prompt appears. Select the VFR approach prompt. The FMC creates a final approach fix 8 miles from the runway and a 3-degree glide path to the runway.
The FMC calculates a final approach fix altitude that is 2,000 feet above the selected runway threshold. Display the legs page to verify the modification is correct. Clear the route discontinuity by making FA08 left the active waypoint. Execute the modification. You can fly the approach using LNAV and VNAV. But don't forget, you must make the landing. We have returned to the Arrivals page with a runway selected. The runway extension line allows you to create a runway extension fix. A distance of 1 to 25 nautical miles can be entered. Enter a distance of 8 nautical miles. Display the legs page. Note that the runway extension fix is preceded and followed by a route discontinuity. A speed and altitude constraint should be entered and route discontinuities resolved. By entering a speed and altitude constraint for this fix on the legs page, VNAV modifies the descent profile to arrive at the fix at the specified speed and altitude. FMC descents are similar to FMC climbs.
To fly a VNAV descent path, the FMC must first calculate a VNAV path. The first step in calculating the VNAV path is determining the end of descent point.
The end of descent point is created when an arrival procedure is entered into the route. It is the waypoint in the arrival procedure with the lowest altitude constraint.
The FMC calculates the descent path beginning at the end of descent point and extending backward and upward along the flight path until reaching cruise altitude. The descent path calculation assumes idle thrust and an angle of descent that follows a specific speed profile. The speed profile includes a deceleration from 240 knots to arrive at the final approach fix at 170 knots. A constant airspeed segment at 240 knots from 10,000 feet to the deceleration point. Another deceleration, this time from economy speed to arrive at 10,000 feet at 240 knots. And another constant airspeed segment at economy speed from cruise altitude.
The FMC assumes economy speed for this segment regardless of the cruise speed used. If a different speed is desired, it may be entered on the descent page. The FMC then calculates this segment based on the entered speed.
The point where this descent path meets the cruise altitude is the FMC computed top of descent.
With the autopilot engaged in VNAV, the descent profile can be automatically flown.
During a VNAV path descent, the autopilot maintains the FMC calculated path. Since the path is maintained, tailwinds result in an increase in airspeed. Headwinds result in a decrease in airspeed from the FMC calculated value. To maintain the FMC calculated descent path, descent winds need to be loaded. To load the descent winds, first display the descent page. Now select the forecast prompt to
The descent winds are loaded on the descent forecast page. Similar to the wind pages, the descent wind altitudes are entered on the left, and the directions and speeds are entered on the right.
If engine anti-ice is to be used, the altitude at which it will be switched on is entered here. Entering the altitude allows the FMC to adjust the descent path for the additional thrust. The transition level compatible with the selected arrival is displayed here. You may enter a different altitude if required.
Enter this descent forecast data starting with the thermal anti-ice on altitude. Enter the wind data for flight level 370, starting with the altitude. The winds for flight level 250 and 7,000 feet will be entered for you. Now enter the reported surface winds for LAX.
Enter this data into the correct line.
The winds and thermal anti-ice are now included in the descent path calculation. Note that you did not need to execute the wind entries. Now return to the cruise page. The distance to top of descent is now based on the data entered on the descent forecast page. To perform the VNAV path descent, the crew must reset the MCP altitude prior to top of descent. If the MCP altitude is not reset within 2 minutes prior to top of descent, the message Reset MCP Altitude displays as a reminder. At top of descent, the cruise page changes automatically to the descent page.
The descent page displays the end of descent point and altitude, the target airspeed, and the speed transition at 10,000 feet. If the MCP altitude is not reset to a lower altitude at top of descent, the airplane continues in level flight. If the airplane continues in level flight too long, it may not be possible to capture the VNAV path. Also, it may not be possible to comply with altitude restrictions in the descent. If descent prior to top of descent is necessary, it can be done very easily in VNAV mode. As with any descent, the MCP altitude must first be reset to a lower altitude. Reset the MCP altitude to the clearance altitude of 9,000 feet. Next, select the descent page.
When the descent page is not yet active, the Descend Now prompt displays. Push Descend Now to begin an early descent. Now execute the modification. The descent page becomes active when the early descent is executed. The autothrottle mode is initially N1, followed by thrust hold, allowing the pilot to adjust the rate of descent. The pitch mode is VNAV speed. The airplane descends at approximately 1,250 feet per minute at economy speed. The airplane maintains this rate of descent and speed until it intercepts the original VNAV path. When the path is intercepted, the thrust mode changes to idle, then back to thrust hold, and the pitch mode returns to VNAV path. The airplane then follows the VNAV path for the rest of the descent. After passing top of descent, a VNAV vertical pointer and deviation scale display on both HSIs, showing the position of the airplane relative to the VNAV path. The deviation scale indicates path deviations up to plus or minus 400 feet.
You learned earlier that unforecast headwinds can decrease the descent speed as the airplane maintains the VNAV path.
If the speed decreases more than 15 knots, the autothrottle comes alive to bring airspeed back to the FMC target speed.
If the autothrottle is not engaged, the message Thrust Required displays. You also learned earlier that unforecast tailwinds can increase the descent speed as the airplane maintains the VNAV path.
The message Drag Required appears if the speed increase exceeds 15 knots above the speed transition altitude, or exceeds 10 knots below the speed transition altitude.
If the speed increases to a limit speed, the page title changes to Active Limit Speed Descent, and the airplane departs the calculated descent path to maintain speed within limits. The autopilot pitch mode changes from VNAV path to VNAV speed when the airplane can no longer maintain the VNAV path. If an airspeed other than the FMC computed target speed is desired, It is entered on the speed line and executed the same way as in climb or cruise. MCP speed intervention during descent is also the same as in other phases of flight. In both cases, the autopilot pitch mode changes to VNAV speed. The airplane maintains the selected speed and ignores the VNAV path.
Speed and altitude constraints for descent are entered similarly to those for climb. Whenever possible, descent constraints should be entered before top of descent.
Speed restrictions associated with altitudes are entered on the descent page.
Speed and altitude constraints associated with waypoints are entered on the legs page. Enter this constraint.
Now return to the descent page.
The waypoint constraint entered on the legs page displays here. If there is more than one constraint, the first constraint displays. Descend Direct displays on the descent page whenever one or more waypoint constraints exist between the airplane and the end of descent point. Selecting Descend Direct deletes all waypoint constraints between the airplane and the MCP altitude. Waypoint constraints entered on the legs page are also deleted individually on the descent page with the Delete key. Delete the constraint at Dene.
This restriction is associated with an altitude rather than a waypoint. Enter the restriction.
Execute the modification.
Approaching 10,000 feet, 240 knots becomes the target speed and the airplane decelerates. Passing 10,000 feet, the speed transition line is removed. Approaching 6,000 feet, 220 knots becomes the target speed and the airplane decelerates again. Passing 6,000 feet, the speed restriction line blanks.
Approaching the final approach fix, the airplane decelerates to arrive at the final approach fix at the final approach fix altitude at 170 knots.
Descent information about a waypoint is available on the Off-Path Descent page. Select the Off-Path Descent page. On this page, the FMC enters the end of descent waypoint for you, but any database waypoint may be entered. The straight line distance to the entered waypoint is displayed.
The airspeed and altitude constraint for the entered waypoint is displayed. Runway 24 right does not have an airspeed restriction.
The speed lines are identical to the descent page.
Select the display prompt to show the clean and drag circles. The drag circle is white and the clean circle is cyan. Both circles are centered on the waypoint entered in the Descend To line. From inside the clean circle and outside the drag circle, the airplane can descend directly to the Descent To point. This assumes idle thrust and speed brakes are extended. The CDU displays the distance from the airplane to the drag circle. Once inside the drag circle, a direct descent to the Descend To point is not possible. The clean circle is similar to the drag circle, except it shows the distance required for a clean configured descent to the waypoint. For this example, the circle shows that a clean descent is no longer possible. The CDU shows the clean descent would have been possible 19 miles back. Turn off the drag and clean circles. Correct. FMC non-normals include access and use of engine-out climb pages, access and use of engine-out cruise pages, single or dual FMC failure, use of the IRS legs page, and use of the IRS progress page. The first topic shows how engine failure affects the FMC. If an engine failure occurs during takeoff, the target climb speed is V2. The thrust mode remains in takeoff. Upon reaching flap retraction acceleration height, VREF plus 80 becomes the target climb speed. Retract flaps on schedule as the aircraft accelerates. Engine-out climb performance data is available through the engine-out prompt on the climb page. Select the engine-out prompt. The FMC computed engine-out speed and maximum altitude are displayed. If the cruise altitude is higher than the maximum altitude, the cruise altitude is changed to equal the maximum altitude. Make the engine-out climb page active. The engine-out climb page is active. All climb and cruise performance data have been recalculated based on engine-out operation. Engine-out performance is based on maximum continuous thrust on the operating engine, which must be set manually. The maximum altitude has replaced the flight plan altitude. The engine-out climb speed is displayed. Manual entry of a different speed is possible, but may cause the maximum altitude value to change. The active altitude and airspeed restrictions, error data, transition altitude, and climb direct prompt are the same as on the normal climb page. If the failed engine is restored, the All Engine prompt restores the normal climb page. The engine has been restarted. Restore the normal climb page. Similar to the engine-out climb page, there is an engine-out cruise page. An engine has failed. Select the engine-out cruise page. The CDU displays the engine-out maximum cruise altitude, engine-out speed, and new ETA and fuel at the destination. The maximum altitude is based on maximum continuous thrust on the operating engine. A descent to an altitude at or below the maximum altitude must be made. Enter the clearance altitude into the MCP. Make the modification active. The page title changes to Active Engine Out Drift Down, indicating that you are above the maximum altitude for engine out operation. Now push the altitude selector to set the cruise altitude into the FMC. The airplane begins drift down. Pitch slowly reduces airspeed to engine out speed and the airplane descends. The new airspeed is minimum drag engine out speed. Either long-range cruise or company speed may be selected for the drift down. Long-range cruise speed provides better fuel performance, while company speed provides an earlier ETA. The airplane levels off at engine-out cruise altitude. The target N1 for engine-out cruise is displayed. The optimum altitude is based on gross weight and is the most economical engine-out altitude. The maximum altitude line and all engine prompt are the same as on the engine-out climb page. The recommended altitude is the most economical altitude based on airplane performance and winds. The FMCs are highly reliable and rarely fail. If the primary FMC does fail, the other FMC automatically takes over. There are several indications of an FMC failure. ICAS advisory messages are displayed. And the center panel FMC light illuminates, indicating an FMC scratchpad message is currently displayed. The CDU associated with the operating FMC displays a scratchpad message indicating which FMC is still operating. And the CDU message light is illuminated. The CDU associated with the failed FMC displays the menu page, and the fail and message lights are illuminated. FMC is no longer an option on the menu page. And the message Timeout Reselect is displayed in the scratchpad. The HSI associated with the failed FMC displays map and vertical track flags. The FMC source selector is used to restore the CDU and HSI associated with the failed FMC. Switch the left CDU and HSI to the right FMC. The right FMC now provides data to both CDUs and HSIs. The FMC option is now available on the left CDU. Reselect FMC on the left CDU. The left FMC provides LNAV and VNAV guidance to the left and center autopilots, and the right FMC provides guidance to the right autopilot. If the left or center autopilot is engaged in VNAV or LNAV when the left FMC fails, the autopilot caution message appears, and the autothrottle disconnects. The LNAV and VNAV flight mode annunciations appear with an amber line indicating the LNAV and VNAV commands to the autopilot are not valid. The autopilot maintains current attitude. LNAV and VNAV can be restored by selecting the right FMC or by engaging the right autopilot. Disengage the center autopilot and engage the right autopilot. LNAV and VNAV guidance have been restored. Selecting right FMC would restore LNAV and VNAV guidance to the left and center autopilots. The auto throttle remains off until it is re-engaged. If both FMCs fail, LNAV and VNAV are not available. The indications of a dual FMC failure are similar to those for a single FMC failure. ICAS advisory messages are displayed for the left and right FMCs, and the center panel FMC light illuminates. Both CDUs display the menu page, and the FMC prompts are gone. The message and fail lights are illuminated on both CDUs, and the message Timeout Reselect is displayed in each scratch pad. Both HSIs display map and vertical track flags. As with a single FMC failure, if LNAV or VNAV are in use, the auto throttle disconnect and autopilot cautions are displayed. LNAV and VNAV commands are not valid, and the autopilot maintains attitude. Although LNAV and VNAV are not available, other autoflight modes are not affected by the FMC failures. Select Flight Level Change and Heading Hold. The autopilot is now engaged in the selected modes. With both FMCs failed, alternate navigation is available through the CDUs. Alternate navigation provides limited CDU navigation capability through the IRS Legs page and IRS Progress page. Display the IRS Legs page. The IRS Legs page is displayed. Most of the flight plan waypoints have been retained. The map can be restored on the HSI by selecting CDU left with the navigation source selector. Select CDU left on the left navigation source selector. The left map display is restored. Now select CDU right on the right navigation source selector. The map display is now restored on both HSIs. There are two alternate navigation CDU pages. The IRS Legs page and the IRS Progress page. Select the IRS Legs page. As you saw earlier, the CDU retains most of the waypoints after dual FMC failure. Waypoints such as DME arcs and conditional waypoints are lost. The CDU inserts discontinuities where the waypoints used to be. The discontinuities can be linked just like on the normal legs page. select the IRS legs page on the left CDU. Enter the coordinates and resolve the discontinuity using the right CDU and observe the left CDU.
Enter the data as shown and select the correct key.
The left CDU IRS legs page does not change. Any modification entered on the right CDU must be entered on the left CDU also. Waypoint names are retained from the FMC at the time of dual failure. But the CDUs have no navigation database. Any new waypoints are named according to the latitude-longitude. Existing waypoints, such as Alder, can be moved as desired and their names are retained. All other normal waypoint creation methods and intercept course features are inoperative. However, you can proceed direct to any waypoint just like you did with an operating FMC. The active waypoint line displays the computed course based on the selected reference. Courses for all other waypoints are referenced to true north. Distance between waypoints is displayed. The latitude and longitude coordinates for each waypoint are displayed. Next, let's talk about the IRS progress page. Display the IRS progress page. The IRS progress page is similar to the normal progress page. The last waypoint and altitude crossed. The waypoint you are flying to and the next waypoint are all displayed. The destination is also displayed. The distance to go and the time to go is displayed for the waypoints and the destination. Current IRS position and ground speed are displayed. The current cross-track error left or right of course is displayed. The desired track to the active waypoint and the actual track are displayed. Both are in magnetic according to the selected reference.